All right, thanks for joining me, guys. So I'll be talking about automating your way out of the dark ages, and I'll be sharing our experience with and without PhoneGap build. So I just wanted to kind of get a feel for what you guys would be interested in. So how many of you came to this because you're interested about mobile? Okay. What about automation? Okay. PhoneGap build? Not too interested in that. Okay, cool. Well, this talk is mainly going to be about our experience using PhoneGap build, but it's not really going to be about PhoneGap build or PhoneGap specifically. So it'll just be kind of a journey of how we at TripCase used it. Yeah. So for a while we used PhoneGap build, and then we got off of it. So I'll go and share with you guys what we did after we stopped using PhoneGap build. And again, it's not going to be really about PhoneGap specifically. I won't also be talking about why we went with PhoneGap for TripCase. We can talk about that, over a beer or something like that. So this talk will just be about our workflow and automation. Okay, so here's the timeline of what it looked like for us whenever we were starting to build the TripCase app, in specifically the redesign. At first, we were building manually with Xcode and Eclipse through the IDE. We were pushing the build button. And then after that, we started to build and distribute with PhoneGap build. And then there was a period of time when we had to go back to manual builds again. And then distribution with the test flight and hockey app services. And then full automated build and distribution to our QA people and our product team. Okay, so some background. It all started with the redesign of TripCase. Originally, TripCase was a native iOS app, native Android, native BlackBerry, native Windows Mobile. We had a mobile web application. We also had a touch web application. And we also had an Android touch application, which was based on HTML and JavaScript and CSS using PhoneGap. So at one period, we had all of these guys. And there was like one developer for each platform. But for the redesign, we decided to go with PhoneGap and switch to HTML5, one thing. So after the redesign, we had mobile web, iOS, and Android. BlackBerry, we started with that, but it was kind of a pain, and we eventually dropped that because we didn't have a lot of usage already with our native BlackBerry apps, and the market just wasn't there for us. But I wasn't going to talk about PhoneGap, and I wasn't really going to talk about HTML5. So one of the things that was good was that since we were using PhoneGap and we were using HTML5, we were moving really, really quickly. We were, working with one code base. The whole team was working in that one code base. It was really awesome. We were feeling productive. HTML5 was the solution to all of our problems. We were just going so fast, and it felt kind of like that plane car for us in the background. It was pretty glorious. The reason why was, we tested in Chrome because everything was WebKit, right? Like it's all the same. So we didn't think that we had any problems. Chrome is WebKit, Safari is WebKit, the Android browser is WebKit, even the BlackBerry browser was WebKit. So we as developers felt really good. We felt really, really confident, but we have a pretty good QA team. And they asked some questions. One of the questions asked was, hey, I wonder how it behaves on Android 2.3 wrapped. So we as developers had been testing in Chrome on the desktop this entire time. So we were like, yeah, it should work. It's, WebKit, whatever, same thing. So we're like, testing Chrome because, WebKit. And turns out that wasn't really a solution for us. We actually had to test on device. So what ended up happening was, we had to test on iOS, Safari, WebView, Chrome. All of those are different. They all kind of render a little bit differently and a little bit weird. Android, you have the 3.2. BlackBerry, so we had 6.0, 7.0, 10. We were, it was all over the place. And then at the time, Blink didn't exist yet, but then it was on the horizon, so that kind of scared us a little bit. And so our whole idea of, testing Chrome, because WebKit, it didn't really work. So we had to get it on device. But the reality was, there was just enough friction for us to not want to do it on device, because at the time, whenever somebody said, hey, I want to get this application on the phone, we had to build it manually with Xcode and Eclipse. And so for native app developers, this isn't really a big deal. But for guys who had been used to the F5 or the Command R refresh cycle of web, it was a pain to do this. So it was just enough friction to make us not really want to make the apps and build them and test them on our phones, even though we were supposed to be mature mobile developers who were really good citizens who test on every single device. It was so much easier to just test in our browsers on our laptops. So the next period I will call the dark age. And it's only the dark age because looking back in hindsight, it seems pretty crappy the way that we were doing everything. So this is what it looked like whenever somebody said, hey, I need a build, I want to test this new feature, or I want to verify that this bug fix happened. So we would do a git pull, we would compass compile, then we would use require.js and concatenate and minify all the JavaScript together. And then we would go into Finder, copy and paste all of the files that we just generated into a www folder for PhoneGap. Then we would plug in a phone. Then we would press this button, and then, cool, we have the app on our phone. And so somebody else would come up and say, hey, I want it on my phone too. So plug in the second phone, press the button, get it on the phone. So, I mean, if you're a developer and you're doing native stuff, that seems like totally normal. To us, it seemed really normal at the time too. If you want an app on your phone, just give me your phone and I'll put it on your device. And sometimes the product team would come over and they would say, hey, I want an app on my phone too. So press the button, then it would say, nope. So that was like the iOS thing. So we ran into a ton of issues. Just Xcode in general, it wasn't really a familiar territory for us. We're all used to, text editors, the browser, and our whole development environment was just a little bit different from a native app developer's workflow. So Xcode was kind of foreign territory for most of the team at the time. So the next period I can describe as the Renaissance. So during this period of manually building, it wasn't really that fun for us. We knew that we needed to test on device. The QAs wanted to test on device, but they really felt guilty about coming to a technical person or a dev and saying, hey, can you make this build for me? And you shouldn't really feel that way. You should, want to get that device and your app on your phone. So what actually happened was, we'd go days or even weeks without testing on device, just because there was just enough friction for us to not want to do it, and the QAs would just test in Chrome. So at this point, the dark ages, it was kind of crappy. We had a ton of bugs, it sucked, and we knew we needed something better, but we didn't really know what we needed to do. We weren't familiar with native app development, and stuff like that. Even though we had native apps before, most of the team at this point was a web development team. A lot of them knew Rails and a lot knew JavaScript, but not many knew how to do native app development. So at a conference like this one, we heard about PhoneGap Build. At the time, it was just being launched. And so hearing about this was pretty cool. PhoneGap Build is a service that lets you take your HTML, your JavaScript, and your CSS and put it in a zip file. And you upload it to their service. And then they build the native apps for you in the cloud. So all you have to do is just zip up your stuff and upload it through a UI. And then from your phones, you just hit their website and download the apps. So that, once we started using this, it was pretty crazy. It was super easy. They even have a service that lets you hook it up to a GitHub repo. And when you do pushes, then it will just build it and you'll have all that stuff there for you. So with PhoneGap Build, our build looked like this. It was just pull down the stuff and then run this build command. We put all the Compass compile, all the node, all that stuff into one command. So it was super easy to do. And this script also zipped up the JavaScript and HTML and CSS and posted it to PhoneGap Build through their API. So this was really awesome. It went from taking I don't know how many steps to just being one, really. And so after we did this, then it would be up on the server. You could see it on PhoneGap Build, and then from your device, you would see the app, and you could just install it from there. So that was really awesome. Even the QAs and the product team could trigger this. They would just go into what we called our build Mac. They would type that command, and then next thing they knew, they could go to PhoneGap Build and get the app on their phone. So at this point, we thought it was pretty awesome, but we wanted to take it a step further. Triggering something by typing, even typing this was still kind of hairy for some of our QA folks, but we wanted to make it easier for them. So kind of the whole, pattern for us has been to make it easier for the rest of the team, because like at first doing this and being the guy who can make builds is pretty awesome, but when you're asked like every single day to do this over and over while you're supposed to be getting other stuff done is kind of a chore. So we eventually started triggering it on every commit. So we had a continuous integration job running, and then after a successful build, it would build the app, zip it, and upload it through the API. So that was really awesome. So we went from building maybe once a week and testing on device with like a stale version to building multiple times a day, and it was just kind of seamless. That was really awesome. Anybody could go to the PhoneGap Build site and get the latest application from there, straight from the site. So for a while, this worked out pretty well. And if this were a perfect world, we would probably be using that forever, but it's not. And I said that, in our timeline, we ended up doing manual builds again. So why did we have to do that? So at this point, we had not used any features of PhoneGap that required any native plugins. We just had HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, and it was just a UI of like lists and stuff like that. So we didn't need any contacts or push notifications at the time. But then we began to need that native functionality. And at the time, PhoneGap build didn't support a lot of the plugins that we needed. In particular, the push notification plugins. I think they do now. So if we didn't get familiar with the way that this worked at that time, we would maybe I don't know, we would probably still be using PhoneGap build, but yeah. So we started manually building again, and we started manually distributing again, and so that meant like plugging in the phones again, doing that whole business. So this is the second dark age for us. Yeah, it sucked. So this is what building looked like. Git pull, and then build.sh. So since we were familiar with it, and the novelty of watching the build script go for 30 seconds to a minute kind of wore off. I would trigger this, and then the next thing I'd be on Hacker News. So this is what our build looked like. Do this, and then do this. And so 30 seconds turns into 5 minutes, and then 15 minutes goes by, and then I'm still reading crap on Hacker News. So, okay, so then when we get back to it, then we're like, okay, archive. I need to archive, make an IPA, and then that takes a while too. So back on Hacker News. So once we have the IPA, okay, we got to distribute it somewhere. We have to put it somewhere. We could email it or upload it to a server, but we really didn't have a way to do this, so we plugged it in manually. This is what it looked like when we had to get an app on the phone. Somebody comes to me, says, "Hey, can I get this? Blah blah blah. Do all this. Okay, and try now." So anyway, the next thing is the second renaissance, test flight. So TestFlight is a cool app, a service that lets you build, once you build the IPA, you can upload that IPA to this service. And this isn't PhoneGap specific or anything, so you can use this even if you use or build regular native apps. So you can build the IPA and then upload it to this site, configure distribution lists, and then have the service email everybody whenever there's a new build. So for a while, we were using the web UI to upload IPAs, and this worked pretty well. You can configure device permissions and stuff like that, and this is a good way to get QAs and the product team to get the app on their phones really easily. They would get a notification and they can install it straight from their phone. Here's a screenshot of me when I don't have an app, and then when there is one, then it'll pop into this list and they can install it straight from here. So this was kind of getting back to the way it was when we were using PhoneGap build. So if you can't use PhoneGap build, but you're building a PhoneGap app, you can build it, get the IPA, go through the web interface for TestFlight, which is free, and then have it distribute to your team. So that worked for iOS, but then we needed a way to do it for Android. We didn't have a way for us to distribute through Android, or our Android APKs, so we used something called Hockey App, which is a competitor to TestFlight. It's a paid alternative, and it has Android and iOS support. At the time when we were using TestFlight, they didn't have Android support. There was a period when they did have Android support, but now they've been acquired by Apple. So I think they dropped the support for Android. And I don't know if we're going to keep on continuing to use TestFlight either. So Hockey App might be a good alternative for you if you're not already using it. So at this point, we were using the web UI and like the Xcode like button to build and distribute. So that was still just enough friction, and we were still not really doing it as often as we would like. You know, we were exposed to and spoiled by PhoneGap build, where we could have this thing just continuously building and sending an app to our QA team and our product team and the dev that's on the team. So we knew that pushing a button was way too much work for us. So yeah, so the goals, eventually it became, you know, a push button deploy. But actually that's not really a goal, because even that was too much friction for me personally. Really, I wanted to have the continuous integration, and I wanted to reduce this time to Hacker News, because, you know, if I have to push a button and then wait before I can do this next step, I'm going to go to Hacker News. Like sometimes during some sessions where I'm pairing with a developer on the team, we will be writing tests and then writing code. And then if the tests take too long to run, he'll be like, Hacker News, let's go. And then we'll both go to Hacker News. I'm like, wait, we're supposed to be pairing and you're supposed to keep me honest. We're not supposed to both go to Hacker News during this like 30-second cycle. So really, it was for me to reduce that time to Hacker News. I wanted to not give any period where I could kind of slip away and do that. So the first obstacle was Xcode. And like I said, up until this point, we were pushing that button in the IDE. And pushing a button was way too much work. So we had to remove that friction, and we had to make it really, really easy. Luckily, Xcode has some command line tools. So instead of using the IDE and opening it up, you can run these command line tools, which will do builds and all that stuff for you. And to be honest, whenever I saw these and I tried to use them, they were super, super intimidating. And I think the first time that I got it set up, we left it that way, and we haven't touched them since. Mostly because we use a tool called Shenzhen, which is a Ruby gem that creates IPA files. So what this does is it actually wraps these Xcode command line tools. So you can use Shenzhen, and it's a pretty nice layer on top of these Xcode command line tools. And it also has an interface to distribute straight to test flight. I've been telling people about this, and it is pretty cool. Our app mostly has a Node.js and Grunt build chain, and this is like one of the few gems that is in it, and we still use it. There's probably a Node wrapper for Xcode now, but this just works so well that we haven't really changed it yet. And it's part of a thing called Nomad. Nomad is a set of command line tools for the Apple kind of environment. It has something called Houston, which lets you do push notifications from the command line. It also has some, Shenzhen, and it also has something called Cupertino, which manages all your device provisioning profiles and device permissions and stuff like that too. And it's all in Ruby. So the way that we used it was we did a gem install Shenzhen, and then that gave us the IPA command. So we would say IPA build, and then the scheme of the project, and then that we were going to do a release build. I think you can do debug and stuff too. So this is all that we did to make the IPA, and that was pretty cool. And then once we have that IPA, we run this command, distribute, and what this does is it takes in the API keys that you have configured for test flight, and the distribution list that you want to notify, and the release notes for that. And then it'll take that IPA, upload it to test flight, and then notify everybody on your team that there's a new build. And we use this all the time. This is pretty useful. And this is provided by Shenzhen as well. So that's how we got through opening up Xcode and pushing a button, getting the IPA, and uploading it to TestFlight. The next thing was getting rid of Eclipse. So actually, Eclipse and Android was way easier to do than iOS and the Apple stuff. All we did was type this, ant release, and that's it. It gives you an APK, and then we could take that APK and upload it to Hockey app, or even put it up on a server for the devs and the QAs to download. Another thing that you can do is just stick it in Dropbox or something. This worked for us for a while. So those are the things that we did to, get us through that. But then we had to put it all together. Those were command line commands, but the QAs and the product team, they couldn't trigger them. It's still, like, typing into the terminal was still way too hard. So eventually, we wrapped all of it up into one big command that could be triggered from Jenkins. And it wouldn't have been possible without realizing that we could do this by being exposed to PhoneGap build and stuff like that. So some of the things that we did for our JavaScript was to automate some of the tasks that we commonly do for our JavaScript code. Right now we're using Grunt. This was a recent thing. At first, these were all shell commands, like bash scripts and stuff. And yeah, so these were all the commands that we ended up automating through Grunt. But I hear there's like a new thing now, so maybe we were too late with this. But it was pretty easy to turn these into Grunt tasks. So there's like configuring API endpoints, adding the build information so that you know like what git commit is that you're using on your phone, concatenating and minifying, compiling templates, doing all this stuff, and even copying the files to the Xcode directory and the Eclipse directory was something that these Grunt tasks did. We also had Grunt tasks that wrapped some of the tasks that we were doing in Xcode. There's a tool that lets you go into Xcodeplists and change like bundle ID names and stuff like that. So this allowed us to have multiple versions of the application installed on your phone. Like you could change the bundle ID and so you could have like, master branch, this branch, that branch, whatever, on your phone at the same time. So those are pretty cool things to do. Yeah. So Cordova has some command line tools that do some of this for you too. At the time when we were doing this, the PhoneGap 3.0 and CLI didn't exist yet, and so we had to do a lot of this on our own using like Shenzhen and stuff like that. But the Cordova CLI has all this stuff. It allows you to build the app, compile it, and even push it to the simulator, all through their command line tools. So this is really, really helpful if you're starting a new Cordova project. But this is specific to PhoneGap. So if you are building an app and you're not really using PhoneGap, you can probably still use Shenzhen and TestFlight or Hockey app. Here are the resources that I used over the course of this past year and a half. So I'll be uploading these slides after the talk to SlideShare, and you probably get them from the conference website too. But I wanted to leave some time for questions because I know everybody does things differently, and people may or may not use PhoneGap or anything like that. So I can take questions now. Wait for the microphone.
You had mentioned that you would be ditching test flight for Hockey app, even for iOS. Is that purely because of the Android support, or was there something else about Hockey app that was better than test flight?
For me personally, I was always wondering why test flight was free, and then eventually they got bought out by Apple. So I don't know if, they did drop support for Android. So we don't have that support. There really wasn't a reason why we would go with Hockey app over test flight, to be honest. And it's paid. Hockey app is paid. Did you guys want to see some? I can skip that. Yeah.
Could you give me a sense for the size of the team, like you mentioned? Sorry, you mentioned handing it over to the QA folks and the product folks, and what the timeline for this journey that you've described was.
Yeah, so we started our redesign for TripCase in the middle of 2012. So this was a long time ago in terms of technical years. Before the redesign, the technical team on the UI, like the clients and stuff like that, was probably 10 to 15 people. Each one of those clients had one person working on them. And if there was a bug on the iOS app and there was somebody, and that guy was gone for vacation, nobody could go in and fix that code, because there really wasn't this idea of sharing. But they really owned that one sliver. And then when we went with the redesign, I joined the team from another group within the company, and there were about 3 of us, and we were web people. So we were really proponents of HTML5. And so the team got bigger. And so it got bigger at one point and then got smaller. So right now, we, devs-wise, we probably have less than 10 on the client teams. And we work across the mobile, which is HTML. We do Rails, and all the way back. And our QAs write Selenium tests. So each team is actually full stack now, and we're not really split up into specializations. So that's a pretty interesting journey that we've gone on over the year and a half as well. And really having the HTML and JavaScript allowed us to bring in some of the guys who were working on the Rails app to work on the client app, because they weren't too scared of it, because it's just JavaScript. Does that answer your question? Yes, thank you. Yeah. And I think the reason why we started doing this was because we didn't consider something to be done until it was tested and signed off by a QA person. And we really did everything that we could to make it so that we weren't holding on to something for weeks and weeks at a time because it wasn't tested. At the point, way before the redesign, somebody would build a feature and then just throw it over the wall, and then the QAs would have to figure out how to test it themselves. But if you say, hey, it's not really done until somebody actually tests it and takes it all the way to the finish line and is probably in production or something like that, then it really incentivizes you as a developer to make things go as quickly as possible. Because I would be done with a feature and I would want to have it go to production as soon as possible. So having to then go to our build Mac, make a build, do all this stuff manually just so that somebody can test it was a huge pain. So having these tools and making it easier for our team to trigger it was a huge help. And we're still learning what we can do to make this better. Right now we have push button builds where we would have to say what branch we want to check out, and then we would say, okay, check out this new feature branch, and then build it and send it to the phones. And so That one is still manually occurring. But I would love to get to a point where we have Jenkins, sending a command to our build machines and then triggering those builds that are just sent, on a daily basis. But we aren't there yet, but we are very close because it's just one command that is run on those machines. I don't know if there are any tools that let you do this like in the cloud. I know that there's something called, or a company called Sauce Labs. They have like VMs that let you build stuff. So it would be cool to not even have a laptop or a Mac Mini in the office that's always building these things. You could just use the cloud to trigger these things. But I just wanted to share like what we had done and show that even if it's not really a pain for you, it could be a pain for your product team or your QAs and stuff like that. So when you have a small team, having to do this stuff and getting distracted by Hacker News is like a huge drain on productivity. Even though it's not that bad, you find ways to fill in your own time. It still means that your teammates are waiting like a day or half a day or an hour for you to build that thing, even though it really only takes you like 5 minutes. So making it take no time at all is the goal for us.
Now that you guys, or PhoneGap Build has added a lot of plugins in the past year, and I know you said push notifications was one,
Yeah.
And that was a similar one that we couldn't go PhoneGap Build, about a year and a half ago. Now that they've added them, have you guys considered going back at all, or are there others that aren't supported?
I have considered going back personally. We started adding more and more plugins. So over the course of this period of time, at first, we were super scared to touch anything native. And now, since we've done this a while, we're more familiar and more confident adding our own plugins. And so we have some plugins that wouldn't be supported with PhoneGap Build. But if I were starting a new project or something like that, I would probably use PhoneGap Build. Or if I wanted to help somebody out who's a designer who knows HTML and CSS, who wants to make a native app that doesn't want to have to get Xcode, or if they're like on a PC or something, I would say, hey, use PhoneGap Build. You just have to do this, test it in WebKit or whatever, test it in Chrome, and then just stick it up on PhoneGap Build. And the Cordova CLI tools make it really easy to integrate with PhoneGap Build as well. So I'm not sure if there are still plugins that we would not be able to use. Like we use Google Analytics timings to track user timings, like when the app starts to when they can first see content and like interactions, like how long they take and stuff like that. And some of the Google Analytics plugins, they don't give you access to that API. They only give you access to like event tracking, like when you touch stuff. So that might be something that is kind of holding us back. But they have made a lot of progress over the last couple years. There was another question behind you.
Thanks. Yeah, I was wondering if you felt any of these tools would be suitable for non-technical testers, not necessarily like a formal QA type environment, but somebody who's very non-technical, like somebody who might be in a focus group, for instance.
Yeah, I think that was one of the reasons why we started going down this path, because whenever I would build a feature, I would personally want it to get into the hands of the product person who asked for it before our iteration was done, so that they could see how it works and get it on their phone, and then if we needed to tweak it, we could tweak it before we were done with it. And with these tools, they're able to say, oh, well, are you working on this feature? Okay, I'll go in here and I'll go and trigger it. And so it is really easy for a non-technical person to do that. And if they're curious, they can see like a list of their recent builds from their phone and then just install them from there. So that was really the goal. I mean, my experience has been on the design side of things and like caring about the user experience. And so making like these normally technical tasks really, really easy for non-technical people has been kind of a thing that I like to do. Because I have been on teams where it's like super hard to get anything done, and like there's one guy who holds the keys to the kingdom, and you have to go through that person to get anything, like even deploying, you know, code to a development environment or getting anything on your phone. So this is really about like getting all this crap out of your way so that you, as the technical person, can, you know, focus on the really difficult problems. Because I don't consider this, you know, a difficult problem once you've solved it one time. Because once you've solved it one time and you start looking at Hacker News when you're doing it, then you know that you should probably automate it away. Was there one more question? Okay, cool. Thanks you guys for joining.